Have you ever stopped to think about it? How a nation born from a blaze of revolution becomes a global superpower in what is, historically speaking, a blink of an eye? The story of the United States is just that, an incredible, explosive transformation. So let's dive into the key moments that made it all happen.
Yeah, that is a huge question, isn't it? The answer isn't just one thing. It's a whole series of game-changing events, some truly radical ideas, and massive, world-altering conflicts that forged a completely new kind of nation. So let's trace that incredible path, starting way, way back at the beginning.
Okay, so before we can even talk about the United States, we have to rewind. A lot. Because this land had a deep and complex story long before any Europeans showed up on its shores. The scale of time here is almost hard to wrap your head around. We're talking about the first peoples arriving over 15,000 years ago and developing into countless unique cultures. Then you flash forward thousands and thousands of years. You get a brief visit from the Norse, but the real world-changing moment comes in 1492 with Christopher Columbus. That arrival opened the floodgates. And a little over a century after that, you get Jamestown, the first permanent English colony. And that European contact had a consequence that is, honestly, it's just devastating. 90%. That's the estimated percentage of the native population that was wiped out. And here's the thing that's so crucial to understand. The primary cause wasn't war. It was disease. Invisible killers brought from Europe that the native peoples had absolutely no immunity to. So you can imagine, back in Europe, word gets out about this new world, and it's like a starting gun goes off. Every major power wants a piece of the action. You've got Spain digging in down in Florida and the Caribbean. France is up north, building this huge fur trading empire. The Dutch, always savvy traders, set up what would eventually become New York. And then there's England, planting 13 distinct colonies right along the Atlantic coast. And those are the seeds of everything that's to come. Right. And it's in those 13 colonies where something really different starts to happen. A new identity, a new way of thinking begins to bubble up. An identity that was, well, going to clash pretty hard with the British Empire. So what was the spark? How did it all boil over? Well, a lot of it came down to money and power. Britain fights this really expensive war against France and then looks at the American colonies and says, hey, you all should help pay for this. So they start imposing new taxes. That did not go over well. The colonists push back with this rallying cry you've definitely heard, no taxation without representation. Basically, you can't tax us if we don't have a voice in your government. Protests turned into riots, things got ugly with events like the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party, and then, bam, 1775, Lexington and Concord. The first shots are fired. The war is on. But just 1 year after the fighting started, we get this number. A year that becomes the year, the official birth date of the entire American idea. Because in 1776, the colonists signed the Declaration of Independence. And you have to understand, this document was so much more than just a breakup letter to the king. It was a mission statement. It laid out this totally radical idea for the time, that people have certain rights that no government can take away. It was a declaration of existence. Now, great ideas are one thing, but winning a war against the biggest empire on Earth, that's a whole other challenge. The Continental Army was scrappy but struggling until the Battle of Saratoga. This was the absolute game changer. That victory proved to France and Spain that, hey, these rebels might actually pull this off. Getting their military and financial support was absolutely crucial to eventually winning the whole thing at Yorktown. All right, so independence is won. The young nation is off and running. And what follows is just this period of explosive growth. But as the country gets bigger and bigger, a deep and very dangerous crack starts to form right down its center. The engine driving this growth was a powerful idea called manifest destiny. It was this widespread belief that the United States was literally destined by God to expand all the way across the continent. This idea fueled land purchases, treaties, and even a war with Mexico. But, and this is a huge but, this expansion often came at a devastating cost to the Native American populations who already called those lands home. And all this expansion forced a question that could no longer be ignored. As we add these new territories, will they be free states or slave states? And this is where that crack really starts to split the country open. You had the North, an industrializing powerhouse with a growing anti-slavery movement. And then you had the South, whose entire agrarian economy was built on the brutal institution of slave labor. They were two different worlds, and it became terrifyingly clear they could not coexist in one nation. those tensions finally erupted into the American Civil War. After years of horrific fighting, the turning point came at Gettysburg. Over 3 brutal days in 1863, it became the single bloodiest battle of the war. The Union victory there was decisive. It broke the back of the Confederate advance and put the North on the long road to victory. 2 years later, the war was finally over. The nation was preserved, and with the passage of the 13th Amendment, the institution of slavery was officially and finally abolished, fundamentally remaking the country. So the country is reunited, but it's deeply scarred. The nation now turns its focus from internal division to building incredible industrial might. And this new strength would soon pull America onto the world stage in a really dramatic way. The next half-century or so is just a whirlwind of global crises. The Spanish-American War gives the U.S. its first taste of being an overseas power. Its late entry into World War I helps tip the balance for an Allied victory. The country then gets rocked by the Great Depression, a decade of economic misery. And all of that serves as a prelude to America being plunged into the largest conflict in human history, World War II. For years, America tried to stay out of the war brewing in Europe. The feeling in the country was very isolationist, but that all shattered in an instant on December 7, 1941. The surprise Japanese attack on the naval base at Pearl Harbor was a national trauma that galvanized the country overnight and plunged it headfirst into World War II. The American war effort was on a scale nobody had ever seen before, and it all culminated in a top-secret, high-stakes program to build a weapon of unimaginable power, the Manhattan Project. Its success with the atomic bomb brought the war to a swift, shocking, and devastating end, but it also pushed the entire world into the terrifying new reality of the nuclear age. Emerging from the ashes of World War II as one of only 2 global superpowers, America's story in the modern era became defined by whole new kinds of conflict, both around the world and right here at home. What came next wasn't a hot war, but a Cold War, a 50-year global standoff. On one side, you had the United States and the West, championing capitalism and democracy. On the other, the Soviet Union and the East, promoting communism. They competed for influence everywhere, fighting indirectly through brutal proxy wars in places like Korea and Vietnam, and even racing each other to land a man on the moon. At the very same time, another monumental struggle was happening inside America's own borders. The civil rights movement, led by towering figures like Martin Luther King Jr., rose up to demand that the nation finally live up to its founding promises of liberty and equality for all its citizens. This quote, it just perfectly captures the moral heart of that long and difficult struggle for the soul of the nation. And then, just as Pearl Harbor had for a previous generation, a new date was seared into the nation's memory, marking the start of a new era. The terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 didn't just change a skyline, they reshaped American foreign policy, domestic security, and the nation's very sense of itself. So, when you step back and look at the whole thing, from a radical experiment in liberty to a complex global leader, it has been a turbulent, often contradictory, and constantly evolving journey. And all of that history leaves us with a pretty powerful question. After coming this far, what will define the next chapter of the American story?